Ka nui te mihi kia koutou. Good morning, everyone. Look, it's an absolute privilege and a real pleasure to be here today, right in the heart of one of New Zealand's fastest growing regions. Can I just acknowledge Jihan? I say thank you very much. It's a wonderful haircut, mate. You're a very good looking man. I'll just put it out there early. Can I also acknowledge Tauranga Mayor Mahe Drysdale and say, Mahe, thank you for your leadership of the city of Tauranga. And also to our great local MPs, Tom Rutherford and Sam Uffindale, thank you for your service and advocacy for this great region as well. But most importantly, can I acknowledge David and Alan and all of the leadership of the Civil Contractors New Zealand organisation and the many, many dedicated professionals who have travelled from every part of the country to be here with us today and tomorrow. I just want to say a huge thanks to each and every one of you for what you do to build and maintain and to fortify the infrastructure that keeps this nation ticking. Whether it's roads that link our communities, the pipes that safeguard our health, or the resilient structures that protect us from nature's fury, none of this happens without your skill, your grit, your determination to tackle the big jobs. Now, we all know in this room that New Zealand has an infrastructure deficit, and we have an unprecedented opportunity to now build a better future for our children and for our grandchildren. And right now, that opportunity is becoming very real. Shovels are going into the ground this week as this government's massive infrastructure program gets underway. But let me cut to the chase about where New Zealand is at, because we have weathered one of the most difficult economic storms in living memory. Loose spending and unprecedented monetary support following COVID overheated the economy with high inflation. That in turn led to rapidly rising interest rates, which created the recession and therefore rising unemployment. Now, for 3 years, we have been living through the painful and inevitable fallout from those policies of the previous administration. And I want to acknowledge that the construction sector has very much borne the brunt of the economic correction. And I can tell you that Alan and the sector's representatives have made your pain abundantly clear to my ministers. But I do believe that the worst is now behind us. Inflation has tumbled from over 7.3% to being within the Reserve Bank's band for the first time in a long time at 2.7%. And as a result of that declining inflation, interest rates have subsequently fallen. Since we were elected, the Reserve Bank has now cut the official cash rate 6 times, and the OCR is now at 2.25%. Business confidence remains well above the 10-year average, and the government has heard you. We're rolling up our sleeves to get construction moving again. Now, it takes more than just a well-crafted press release and a budget appropriation to go off and build infrastructure. We actually need the work to get done. We need action. We need shovels in the ground. The previous government talked a big game about infrastructure, but they struggled to deliver. As a new government, we inherited a pipeline of phantom projects, roads, schools, hospitals and bridges that were announced but never delivered. And that's why I was pleased to announce last Sunday that more than $6 billion of government-funded infrastructure projects will begin construction between now and Christmas. Workers will start construction on billions of dollars of roading projects, including Otaki to North Levin Expressway, the Melling Interchange, the Waihohe Road Upgrade, and the new Omanawa Bridge on State Highway 29. Around $800 million worth of school property projects will also get underway in the next 6 months. We're also progressing vital health infrastructure, including upgrades to Auckland City Hospital, Middlemore Hospital and Hawke's Bay Hospital, plus a new acute mental health unit at Hutt Valley Hospital. Construction on the Waikato Medical School, which we announced on Monday, is also expected to get underway by the end of the year. Now, all of that is great news for New Zealanders, but it's also great news for the civil construction sector. Analysis from our Infrastructure Commission suggests that for every $1 billion of infrastructure investment per year, that generates about 4,500 jobs. So as work gets underway on projects worth more than $6 billion, we are potentially looking at tens of thousands of new construction jobs. Real jobs and real opportunities for thousands of Kiwis and added momentum for our economic recovery. Now, of course, the benefits of infrastructure go far beyond just construction. The roads and the schools and the hospitals that you are building will lift productivity right across our economy. Reliable roads that link markets and help businesses operate efficiently. Well-designed schools that deliver better educational outcomes for our kids. Quality hospitals that will help keep our communities and our workforces healthy. Another $500 million worth of local government projects are also getting underway this year, including 5 projects here in Tauranga. But this is only the beginning. The National Infrastructure Pipeline shows planned future projects across central and local government and the private sector now total $207 billion, and that's nearly $40,000 per person or $116,000 per household. So my message today is that yes, we have been through difficult and challenging times. We have turned the corner, and the future for civil construction in New Zealand is bright, and it starts now. Since coming into government, we have put the focus on delivery. It's one thing to fund an infrastructure project, as I said, and to make an announcement. Delivering that infrastructure is difficult, and it's another task. You can't drive on a budget appropriation, or you can't get an education from a press release. Delivery really matters. And the timing between funding and delivery in this country is really surprising and in many cases shocking. If we look at those $6 billion worth of projects getting underway by Christmas, many of those were kicked off more than 5 years ago. But governments must do much more than just write a business case or draft an appropriation or issue a press release. We have to follow through and we have to deliver. And that is exactly what we are doing, because New Zealanders deserve tangible progress on infrastructure, and frankly, they haven't seen it for years. Our vision is crystal clear. This country needs world-class infrastructure. It's one of the platforms for economic growth and improving our economic productivity, and it will protect us from future shocks into the future. We're not just content with simply patching up and maintaining our existing set of assets. We're building the infrastructure that the country needs for the future and giving us the foundation for ongoing, lasting, sustainable growth. That's why infrastructure is front and centre and one of the 5 pillars of what we call our Going for Growth plan. Because efficient transport infrastructure to move people and freight rapidly and safely. We want to see quality schools to provide our kids with places to shine, not the cramped relics of the 1970s. We want modern hospitals to provide gold standard healthcare for every Kiwi, and we need an energy system that delivers affordable, secure, abundant energy, rain or shine. But none of that vision can happen without the people in this very room. And civil construction pumps more than $17 billion into our economy, which is about 6% of our total GDP. It employs 300,000 Kiwis. So construction is a critical part of our country's economy, and it's your innovation, your problem solving and invaluable know-how that will build this country's future. So let me spell out to you some of the nuts and bolts changes that we've been working on in order to go to the heart of your operations. The first up is vocational education. Officials project that the infrastructure workforce that we will need will balloon from 40,000 people out to 97,000 people over the next 3 decades. Now, to support that growth in workforce, we need a vocational educational system that delivers graduates with high quality skills to do the job. And that's why we're scrapping the previous government's centralised Te Pukenga approach and reinstating regional institutes of technology and polytechnics. We're bringing in-work training back to the regions, and we're tailoring it to local employer demands. Our goals include delivering work-ready graduates for construction who can add value from day one. Second, we're fixing New Zealand's water infrastructure with our local water done well policy. This policy also hands back control to local communities, but with added checks to make sure that funding is secured and that essential water assets are well maintained. Councils will no longer be able to run down their below the ground assets to pay for above the ground services. Councils must lodge water service delivery plans by September and then prove their financial viability. Our goal is local ownership and control so that water is safe and available when and where it is needed without putting financial pressure on councils. Thirdly, the government is making progress on our sweeping regulatory reform program. This is the most important part, I think, of our agenda in this term of government, and that is replacing the Resource Management Act, and that work is being led by Minister Chris Bishop and supported by Simon Court. This is an enormous and a very difficult and complex piece of work, as you well know, arguably the single biggest reform in the government's work program. Planning has an important role, but frankly, the RMA has simply become way too big, way too complicated, and too slow to be useful. It has stifled growth and it hasn't protected the environment. And here's the kicker, it shouldn't take 19 months to build a 3-bedroom home in New Zealand that costs 50% more than the same house being built in Australia. So we intend to introduce 2 pieces of legislation, the Planning Bill and the Natural Environment Bill, into the Parliament by the end of this year. One of the really exciting elements of the replacement system is what we call standardised zones. Currently, New Zealand has an incredible 1,100 zones across our country, and that complexity is a major barrier to growth. Standardised zones mean far fewer zones, and it's quite possible because Japan has just 12 standard zones in a country with a similar land size to New Zealand and a much larger population. Infrastructure or building designs that comply in Northland will now comply in Southland. Plans will be faster as planning effectively becomes a paint-by-numbers exercise for councils. And finally, the government's Fast Track program is underway and is already slashing approval times. Fast Track included 149 projects and legislation with 43 infrastructure projects. And so far, more than 50 applications have been submitted to the Environmental Protection Authority, and 3/4 of those applications are for infrastructure or urban development. It's all part of getting the country moving again and growing and building things and getting things done. The past few years have certainly hammered home that infrastructure is more than just about growth. It's also to be our shield in really tough times. And just 2 weeks ago, we once again saw nature's power on full display in the Tasman region. We need structures that can endure as storms become more frequent. We need investments in flood resilience that can fortify communities when the extreme weather hits. We want infrastructure that keeps working through extreme weather rather than just adds to the chaos. This government views civil construction as a true partner. You know the real world problems of building in this country's rugged and very challenging terrain. You see issues before they snowball. You literally do know the drill. And earlier this year, we invited investors from around the world to our Infrastructure Investment Summit. There was 110 entities represented, over $6 trillion of investment funds available. And from that summit, we've subsequently already seen major international backing for the Ruakura Super Hub in the Waikato with almost $1 billion. And we've seen a series of strong bids from international consortia for the Northland Expressway. Our goal is to unite local and global investors with homegrown construction talent to ramp up growth. And the government is deeply, deeply committed to public-private partnerships to support further investment and to get projects happening much sooner than they would if the government does it alone. It's all about streamlining our processes. It's all about axing the needless hurdles and the barnacles that are slowing down growth and that I think have held us back for several decades. There is a bright future for civil construction in New Zealand. As our projects get underway and the economy recovers, I'm extremely confident infrastructure will help unleash an unprecedented wave of prosperity as this country finally starts making progress on long-standing infrastructure deficit. We're committed to supporting the construction industry and unleashing growth. We will continue to dismantle the obstacles that have held the country back. We will provide certainty and stability with an enduring commitment to the infrastructure pipeline. And we will deliver smart investments and value for money for every dollar of spending. Together, we can do more than build structures. Together, we can build New Zealand's future. Thank you for listening to me today. Look forward to the questions and look forward to engaging with many of you in the mix and mingle afterwards as well. Thank you so much.
Round of applause for the Prime Minister. Thank you very much for being here, Prime Minister. A lot on the government's work program and plenty to discuss. So now it's my pleasure to welcome CCNZ Chief Executive Alan Pollard to the stage. Alan's going to have a chat with the PM. Let's welcome Alan. They'll be on.
It's like being interviewed by Oprah Winfrey, isn't it? If you all look under your seats, you'll find there's a car available to you all.
Well, look, thanks, Prime Minister. Really great to have you again. Last time we caught up, actually, you were driving a digger at our excavator competition, and you did an extraordinarily good job, I have to say. So while we're talking about job creation coming forward, perhaps there might also be a secondary role for you.
This whole politics thing doesn't work out, you reckon?
Exactly.
I could get a
driving
job
a digger.
All right, that sounds
great.
good.
Hey, look, just to start off with a pretty simple question, really, I think. I mean, our view as an industry is that we're absolutely critical to the health, wealth and well-being of our communities. But I'm interested in hearing from you your perception of the industry, in particular the role that we might play in your productivity and growth agenda.
Yeah, look, I think I'm new to politics. I've been there 4 years. I've obviously been Prime Minister coming up almost 2 years. And my motivation for coming into politics is that having lived overseas for 16 years, you come back home and you realise, man, this is a fantastic country. You know, this is a country that has huge, huge potential, and there's no reason why we can't realise all that potential if we go to work and actually get things fixed and sorted. Probably for the last 30 years, I've studied other small advanced economies that are similar size to New Zealand. And my key question as I've gone around the world sort of looking at them and spending time in them, trying to understand them, is why are they wealthier than us? Why have they been able to lift their standard of living? And I think over the last 30 years, actually, over successive governments, that the problem that New Zealand faces in its economic place is what's called economic productivity. That we are some of the hardest working people on planet Earth, and yet we have failed to collectively lift our standard of living for all of our people. So when you step back and ask those questions and look at what really drives making New Zealand wealthier and more prosperous and lifting that standard of living, it's not just working harder, we actually have to work smarter. And the 5 things that consistently come back is you have to have a world-class education system. You can't be living in New Zealand in 2025 where over half our kids don't go to school regularly, half aren't where they need to be at on reading when they go to high school, and 80% of them aren't where they need to be at on maths when they go into high school. We need to make sure we embrace more science, technology, innovation. We've got awesome scientists, but we need to commercialise our inventions and our technology, and that's how we get higher value products and services we sell to the world. We've got to make this a really easy place to do business, and something has happened in my 16 years overseas when I came back, that we've turned this country into a country of bureaucrats and lots of can't do, not can do. And we've sort of lost that agility and that speed and that simplicity, and we've made it terribly complex for a country of 5 million people with lots of regulation and layers. And the red tape and the green tape is frankly regulations that are not adding any value or adding any benefit. So they have to be stripped off. We need to embrace more trade and investment. We want to double our exports and we want to attract foreign investment to New Zealand. And the 5th thing, arguably one of the most important, is that we've got to make sure we've got modern, reliable infrastructure. And the problem with all the infrastructure investment in New Zealand is that it's shaped by our political cycles. So you get politicians come in from one flavour of one party to another one, and things go on, off, on, off, on, off. And you're talking about simple things, you know, extending a road from Cambridge to Pieri. You're talking about, you know, I watched a light rail project conversation take place for 6 years, $300 million spent, and the route wasn't even confirmed, or the mode of that wasn't even confirmed. I watched Montreal, on the other hand, start the project a year later, build out a light rail system, people on it within 5 years. So why do we have to tolerate that that's the way and the standard that we accept when the world-class standard is up here and what we are doing may be good but not great, and we want to be doing great. So infrastructure becomes really, really critical, and the civil construction sector absolutely critical for that. The challenge is that we can't do all of that with the government's balance sheet at a central government level, and arguably local government can use their balance sheet in a much smarter way too, but we need to do public-private partnerships. And all around the world, there is an incredible sense of people lifting into the middle classes. I just came back from China. There's 500 million middle-class people who live a standard of living similar to our middle class in New Zealand. There's 420 million sitting in India. And when I spoke to Prime Minister Modi over dinner in Laos, I said, you know, mate, what's going on in India? What are the challenges you've got to deal with? He said, well, Chris, to give you sort of a sense of it, he said, I've got to open 2 universities essentially every week. I need 2,000 more aircraft to fly just my domestic aviation market in India, and I need 150 new airports to be built probably within 5 years. And so you sit there and go, wow, that's a bit of growth challenge. And the reality is he's lifted 250 million people that used to worry about where they would work tomorrow, where they would sleep tonight, and they're now in the middle classes and they want to travel and they want to invest in education for their kids and they want to save money for their superannuation and retirement. And those superannuation funds need to be invested, and some of that money needs to come to New Zealand. And so, you know, that's part of attracting the foreign direct investment to New Zealand so that it can partner up with projects on the ground here, and we can get roads and schools and hospitals and courthouses and everything built much quicker than it would be if the government takes its own time to get there.
I mean, certainly our latest survey that we've just released, you may not have seen the results yet, but they indicate that 73% of our members now see the pipeline as the greatest challenge, and you referred to that in your comments as well. Just as kind of a brief case study, we have a member, for example, traditionally has traded over $100 million. In the last 12 months, revenue's cut in half. Yeah. They've laid off 150 staff. They've sent people and equipment to Honourable, to American Samoa and so on. They're just about to sell 3 million of their kit to Dubai. It's that conversation about it's great having a pipeline and all these plans, and we strongly support the investment plans you have, but it's the here and now that we're really worried about. So again, what comfort can you give?
Yeah, well, I get the frustration. I'm as equally frustrated as you, having been on this job for 18 months as well. But what I just say to you is that in this sector, I think you get the booms better than anybody else, and you get the bust worse than anybody else. It's exaggerated on the upside and on the downside. I really think that, and part of why we've been working on this over the last 18 months is we can play whack-a-mole and we can talk individual projects as much as you like in a very tactical kind of way, but we actually have to get some of the scaffolding that we see in those countries in place here in New Zealand. So, for example, I took Chris Bishop and Shane Jones and Simeon Brown over to New South Wales because I wanted them to see what an independent infrastructure commission with a proper 30-year pipeline of projects actually looks like. And that doesn't matter which politicians are in power. Those projects and the priorities well established. It's just the funding of what gets done. But the variations are tweaks on the margins, not actually a whole conversation of whether this particular project is or isn't happening under this government. We need to make sure that we've got the 10-year city and regional deals so that we actually agree between local government and central government what is the critical infrastructure that needs to get built that will have the most difference for the most amount of time, most amount of people. And then we need this NIFCO funding and financing mechanism. So it's incredibly frustrating because tactically people just say, yeah, but that's great, Chris, I need work right now. But that has been the problem of New Zealand. And I think if we get the proper structures in place, which is what we've started to do, then you actually don't get the booms going off so big and the troughs being so deep as they actually have been. So I think, I fully get it, and that's the frustration that we have. But if we carry on doing it the way we've been doing it since 1975, we have to be more professional than that. You cannot, we're asking councils now to consent 30 years worth of consenting of where residential property may go to, because we need clarity around a bit of a master plan of where things are actually going. Otherwise, we sort of all scrape around for a bit of money and then we do a project and then we sort of look at each other and go, okay, what's next broken that we've got to go fix? We've got to be much more strategic and better at that stuff, and we can do. So I appreciate it's fully frustrating because the foot's on the accelerator but nothing's happening. I'm trying to signal that it will start. It is going to happen. It's why the $6 billion signalled on Sunday was really important. But we also have to get a bit better organised because we can't just set ourselves up for this whole boom-bust thing that we've been doing in the way that we have been doing it.
And it's kind of our perverse dilemma we have at the moment, and I know it was mentioned in the House yesterday. I think Minister Bishop was a bit bemused by it, but the conversation on the one hand about the lack of work, but on the other hand we're having a conversation about the need to upscale as well, because we are sure that when the programs do hit the market, they'll come at scale and they'll come at pace. And as we're structured at the moment, we've had multiple rounds of restructuring, we don't have the capacity available to deliver those projects. What's your thought about that sort of pipeline of people?
Yeah, I mean, that's partly what Penny's been trying to work through on the polytechnic vocational piece. It's also, frankly, what Erica's talking about. You might have heard us talk this week about NCA level, NCA program in secondary school. We just don't think that's working and delivering. And a big part of that will actually be fixing up the vocational pathways through secondary school, which we think we can do a hell of a better job of than what we're doing currently. And then equally, we need the polytechnics to get very aligned to industry, and we want you to take control and ownership about what you want those polytechnics to be training and developing, so those young people coming through will come through in the way they are. We are going to go from 40,000, as I said, up to 97,000 people needed in this sector within the next 3 decades. And it's not just the quantity of workers, it's also the quality. But the problem is you end up, what's happened in this country is we forgot about how to run an economy for 35 years, which we'd sort of worked out how to do it over 35 years. You don't go increase government spending by 84%, drive up domestic inflation, drive up interest rates. What's the consequence of that? Recession. Eventually, the people in this room have said, well, I haven't got demand because the economy's in recession and contraction. I actually have got all this inflation coming at me on my cost base, and now my final decision, I've got to lay off workers, which is the lag effect, and that's what you're seeing us now peak with unemployment at this time. So I'm just saying there's some immutable laws of economics that you have to respect and actually manage, and when you don't, that's a problem. It's an immense frustration to me. Just to give you a feel for it, you guys have got really expensive costs, but I've got to pay $10 billion worth of interest essentially out to the world for debt that we haven't got anything to show for it. Our debt went from $60 billion up threefold to $180 billion, and we pay $10 billion in interest this year for the first time. That is a huge amount of money. That's a huge amount of roads and schools and hospitals and courthouses and things that we want to get built that we can't get built. That's more than we spend on police, customs, corrections, justice combined. So that's just dead. That is just money going as interest payment, not even paying down the debt at this point. So, that's a real frustration, that we will feel. Now, we've got to fix that. That's our problem now to fix. We've got to turn the show around, and we've got to get results, and we've got to get focused on outcomes and delivery. And it's just trying to find that balance of, let's get it set up so that when it runs, it then runs. It doesn't actually, we don't do the stuttering stuff that we've been doing for 30 plus years.
Mm-hmm. And it kind of leads then on to that conversation about the long-term view of infrastructure as an intergenerational asset and the whole bipartisan approach. I know you've been a champion of that message. How realistic do you think that is across parties?
Well, I think, we've tried. We had the infrastructure summit. I actually wanted the Labour Party there, so I invited them to the summit. Barbara Edmonds wrote a statement around the public-private partnerships that we think is consistent, and we need to make that not a bipartisan. It needs to be bipartisan. It needs to flow through irrespective of which government's in power, because actually that's what international investors want to see. To give you all a feel for it, New Zealand sort of is in the bottom of the OECD in terms of attracting foreign direct investment to a country. And so we do a very poor job of welcoming overseas capital to a country, and yet it's so critical when you look at those other wealthy, advanced, small economies to actually power up and do the public-private partnerships. Think about the Øresund bridge that runs from Denmark into Sweden. Think about some of those big projects that have been happening in that regard. The public-private partnership model is quite critical. So on those sorts of things, we should have bipartisan support, I believe. That's why I want to make the Infrastructure Commission do that project list to be independent of governments and ministers, so that actually we agree what that set of infrastructure can be. That's why I want to lock up 10-year deals with local governments, so that actually some of that scaffolding gets around. What is the right way to do public-private partnerships, because funding and financing differs by different types of work and jobs. I've spoken with the Victorian Premier, the New South Wales Premiers, who have done a big history of PPPs over 30 years, and with some really great experiences, some poor experiences, but you've got to get the right funding and financing mechanism to tie into the right type of project as well. So I sort of say, yes, we've got to put some of the different scaffolding around to make it less political, particularly when we've got 3-year political cycles. But more importantly, we need some things to be committed to from all sides of politics that actually says, this is just the way we do things in this country. And so, anything that you can do to make sure that, we're getting a bipartisan support as well, feel free to lobby the parties as well. I keep trying to do that as well.
Mm-hmm. And we certainly will. And there's no doubt that the New Zealand taxpayer base or the ratepayer base is just not large enough to fund this critical infrastructure stuff.
What was interesting to me, and I think I've spoken to you about it before, Alan, but it was really interesting to me, like local government's really struggling and you're seeing rates go up, right? So our inflation number came out this week, it's 2.7%. Local government rates went up on average over 12.5% or 12.2%. If they hadn't done that, we'd have an inflation rate of 2.3%. So basically the country's, we've got inflation back in the band for the first time. We have to grip inflation up, because if you don't, that's what hurts lower middle income people, a lot of your workers in your business. And we've done that. But councils is then growing up at 12.2%. And it's not sexy stuff, but it's quite interesting when you actually fix what I'm talking about, some of the things long-term and strategically. So Auckland, our biggest city, was planning a 24% rate rise. And a big part of that was the investment and the way that they were constructing the investment into their 3 waters assets. We ended up putting Watercare into a separate financial structure and got what's called balance sheet separation and also local control and influence over those water assets. And all of a sudden that freed up $800 million on the council's balance sheet, and they increased rates 6%, instead of 24%. Then Watercare now has its own funding and financing model, ability to borrow more than what the councils can to build out long-run assets over the long term, assets that are 30, 50, 70 years. So actually some of that entity and that financial structuring is actually really important in how you unlock a huge amount of value so that you can actually get these projects built in turn, so that Watercare doesn't just do the Central Interceptor in Auckland. It's now got a rolling project of 4 or 5 projects for the next 30 years that it can roll into. So that's what I'm talking about when I say, when I go look at Singapore and I look at Denmark and I look at Ireland and I look at New South Wales and I look at other Netherlands, countries of similar size or natures, have dynamics that are similar to us. That's what we've got to do, is have a much more strategic sort of planning process, and the part of that's the structures and the mechanisms we put around government.
And I'm conscious the clock's ticking down, but one more question for you too, that it is election year next year. Polls fly up and down, of course, as you rightly say, the only poll that counts is election day. But what can we expect from your government on that infrastructure support and policy space in a second term?
It'll be accelerating big time. I mean, because we are bought into this going for growth, those 5 things that I alluded to before, that actually when you look at what drives wealth in a country, those are the 5 things that make it happen. And so, what we want to do is, our feeling very much is, look, the last lot took the keys to the car, they drove at a great speed, put the car in a dirty, great big ditch on the highway, we've hauled it out, got it up the right way, got the keys into the door, got going into first and second gear. But we have a huge amount of potential in this country, and that's the reason I came 4 years ago, was because I don't want to sit on the sidelines and not say we didn't try to do something different together. And we've got to work as business, we've got to work as community, we've got to work as government together on these challenges, but these opportunities. But I'm just telling you, this country has a huge amount of potential, so don't give up on New Zealand or New Zealanders, because if you just take a step back, we are bang smack in the middle of this Indo-Pacific region where this rapidly rising middle class, as I talked about, there's 1 billion people, as I just said, essentially in China and India in the middle classes. And so they want New Zealand products, they want New Zealand services, they want New Zealand engineering and construction services in particular around the countries as they grow from developing countries into developed countries. Huge opportunity for us. Yes, there's challenges in the world and it feels a bit chaotic and it feels a bit challenged at the moment, and it is, but our social and democratic institutions are really strong. We have abundant natural resources. There should be no reason why we don't have we have an energy crisis as we experienced last year. We can fix that. But we need to make investment happen there. And most importantly, we have hugely talented, clever, world-class people. So I look at that and go, man, there is no reason we know the destination we're trying to get to is to make this country much more prosperous, much more wealthy, and to lift the living standards for everybody. And there's no reasons why we can't do it. But we have to go to work now, and we have to say, stop the politicking and get on and get things delivered and sorted for people and get the results out there for New Zealanders. And I think we can do it, and I think we can do it, because we are a country that, we've got amazing people that want to do that and have ambition and aspiration and positivity and can do, and that's pretty exciting.
No, well, thank you so much for your time today, Prime Minister. Appreciate that. You've got people in the room and around the country willing and able to contribute to the potential that you're talking about. So really keen to keep engaged with you, and we look forward to this accelerating project work coming to market.
Yeah, well, thank you for your leadership, mate, and thank you for the challenge and provocation you give us regularly. It's very necessary, so please keep it up. I want the system flogged. It's good so it gets results. And can I just say to all of you in the room, again, thank you so much for what you do, because you've got lots of things you could choose to spend your time on in your life, and you've chosen to do something really important because you actually are building a country and the building assets that create a standard of living, but also help New Zealanders and help your fellow citizens in so many different ways. So thank you for what you do. We really appreciate you.
Round of applause for the Prime Minister. Thank you very much, Prime Minister, and we're also looking forward to a political panel tomorrow afternoon where we'll have representatives from across the political spectrum.